And then Richard Spencer got punched in the face, right? Which was an amazing moment in comedy history. And then out of nowhere, a hero came along and punched him in the face, instantly turning him into a meme. It's like casting a spell. And then every white liberal came out of the woodwork going, I don't know if that's what we should be doing. Should we really be applauding someone for punching a Nazi?
The ethics of punching Nazis is an interesting and nuanced question. As a Jew, someone whose community was and is one of the primary targets of the Nazis, this question feels particularly personal to me. However, I want to emphasize that ethical discussions should not revolve around emotions or what feels satisfying. Ethics are far more complex than simply finding satisfaction in seeing a Nazi punched. The widely publicized case of Richard Spencer being punched sparked debates about the ethics of such actions, and some people seem to view this questioning as unnecessary or even harmful. But I strongly disagree. Questioning and discussing the ethics of actions like this is crucial. It's not a bad thing to analyze these events critically. We also need to consider the long-term consequences of such actions. Ethics isn't just about the immediate moment, but about the broader implications. While it might feel obvious to some that punching a Nazi is justified, it's far from a straightforward question. These issues deserve careful thought, debate, and questioning, precisely because they are not as clear-cut as they might seem. And this questioning has nothing to do with being a white liberal. Ben Shapiro, one of the most famous Jewish conservatives, has spoken out against punching Nazis on multiple occasions.
Unfortunately, it's now coming from the top. So I think that the election of Trump has made the left in many ways fully insane, to the point where civilized behavior is becoming less and less common. And this, of course, does not apply to everybody who's a liberal. It doesn't apply to every Democrat. But there is this strong strain that's building up in the more extreme circles that say that violence is okay. What they say is somebody's a Nazi, violence against Nazis is okay, therefore I can attack X, right? So this is why the other day there's a neo-Nazi, he's a white nationalist is probably fairer, named Richard Spencer, who was punched in the head on the street while he was doing an interview. And so the internet lit up with, is it okay to punch a Nazi? And the answer is no, it's not okay to punch a Nazi. It isn't. Because by the same logic you can punch a Nazi, you should be able to kill a Nazi, right? If you're violating someone's bodily integrity on the basis of their political viewpoint, you are doing something uncivilized and wrong. But there's an actual argument over, can you punch the Nazi? Okay, so a lot of the left says, great, Richard Spencer got punched in the face. That's just terrific. And then they say, well, Milo is Richard Spencer. And then they say, well, Trump is Richard Spencer. And they say, well, Shapiro is Richard Spencer. And pretty soon it's bled down to Mitch McConnell is Richard Spencer. Anyone I disagree with is Richard Spencer, and Richard Spencer is Hitler. Therefore, I can use violence against them. Sarah Silverman tweeted today that she wants basically a violent uprising. She says fascists should get overthrown. We'll use the military to overthrow. Wake up and join the resistance, all caps.
Is that how we want to have political conversations? Shouldn't we hear people out? If you punch a Nazi, it doesn't make you as bad as one.
The argument that punching a Nazi makes you just as bad as a Nazi is strikingly similar to a common argument made by some opponents of the death penalty. They claim that executing a murderer is morally equivalent to the murderer's own actions. This perspective often fails to recognize a crucial distinction. Executing a guilty murderer as an act of justice is fundamentally different from a murderer unjustly taking the life of an innocent person. Punching a Nazi is an ideologically driven assault, but it does not make you a Nazi or morally equivalent to one. A core aspect of Nazism is the promotion of genocide against innocent people. That alone is a profoundly wicked ideology, far worse than committing an act of assault. While assault is generally wrong, it is not comparable to advocating for or perpetrating mass extermination.
You know what we should do with Nazis? We should debate them, and we should defeat them in the marketplace of ideas. I don't really know where that is.
Very few people are saying we should debate Nazis. I think the majority of discussions about debating Nazis or Holocaust deniers say that we should not debate them. For example, on page 61 of Denial, History Betrayed, it says, "And this is why Deborah Lipstadt refuses to debate Holocaust deniers in public." Her argument is that the debate starts from a false premise, and any attempt to discuss Holocaust denial as a serious topic face-to-face is giving free publicity to a specious and offensive point of view. At the same time, however, Lipstadt and some other contra-denialists, such as Michael Shermer, are against deniers being silenced by criminal legislation, as was the case with Irving in Austria and Zindel in Canada. Their argument is that any suppression of ideas and free speech within the law in a democratic society, however offensive and misguided the ideas may be, militates against a more general and legitimate open debate in a free society. And as for not knowing where the marketplace of ideas is, that is quite bizarre considering you are literally on its main source. The internet is the primary space for the marketplace of ideas. It has been the most successful method of sharing ideas in human history. Of course, there are problems like echo chambers and misinformation, but this is the best we have, and it does work. There are countless stories of people being de-radicalized because of the internet. We see a massive movement, for example, of ex-Muslims who have abandoned radical Islam thanks in part to the internet. Of course, the opposite happens too, and that's why we need to speak out and teach critical thinking, ethics, and media literacy.
I would like to defeat Nazis on planet Earth first. And then after we eradicate them here, you can fight them in the marketplace of ideas.
When you say you want to defeat and eradicate Nazis here on Earth, does it mean eradicating them through violence or eradicating them by convincing them to give up their ideology? Considering violence has already been praised here, I assume this is referring to violence. So he may be suggesting that even though someone may not have committed a crime, but purely based on their ideology, they can be eradicated. In that case, why stop at Nazis? Why are communists not also worthy of eradication? Communism is responsible for much more death than Nazism. As journalist Jeff Jacoby wrote for one of the world's most famous Orthodox Jewish websites, the communist system introduced by Lenin has led to more slaughter and suffering than any other movement in history. For sheer murderous horror, there has never been a force to compare to it. The Nazis didn't come close. Professor of American Foreign Policy Michael Mandelbaum wrote, "Measured by body count, the Third Reich does not qualify as the worst political movement of the 20th century. Communism killed more people. Certainly Mao and arguably Stalin presided over more murders than did Hitler, if combat deaths in World War II are omitted from his total. Yet it is Hitler who has the worst historical reputation of all of them. This is so in part because he lost his war, his regime came to an end, and his crimes were fully exposed. Communism escaped that fate. In addition, Hitler explicitly endorsed murderous inequality. The rhetoric of Marxism-Leninism, by contrast, is suffused with the aspiration to universal equality and brotherhood. The reality proved to be radically different, but communism, unlike Nazism, seems to have received global credit for its professed good intentions. How about extreme Muslims who promote minor marriage, which is a gross human rights violation? Should they also be attacked?
Hope it's a zinger.
Yeah, you'll love this.
Oh.
You'll really love this.
I love this one.
Look
This is great.
This is your article. Iran is what the Islamic State will look like if it succeeds. And here you say, shocking child marriages in Iran. Yeah. Iran allows the marriage of girls between 10 and 12. This is legalized pedophilia. It's frightening, horrifying, and despicable. Do you think marriage for girls under 14 is pedophilia? Do you think that the Prophet ﷺ was committing horrifying, frightening, despicable pedophilia? Talha, can you please explain why your article on Middle East Eye is up here calling marriage with females under the age of 14 as shocking pedophilia?
We'll to Dr. Talha to respond for a minute.
Well, he's asking me to answer questions about Iraq and then talking about pedophilia. Listen, Daniel, I promise you, if you survive this debate with your reputation intact, I will debate you on each of those points. But don't distract the audience from the fact.
Oh, so it is.
It's pedophilia.
It's pedophilia.
Oh, no.
Let's finish this. Why can't you say it's not pedophilia?
There you go. There you go. Who's interrupting?
Yeah. Taste your own medicine. Bitter medicine, huh?
I'm making you taste your own medicine, and everyone's loving it.
We have to refocus. Go ahead. You got about 40 seconds, Dr. Talha.
So we're talking about pedophilia and whatever. He's just trying to distract from the subject. He's trying to mudsling. And yeah, the people in your country, I'm afraid, are pedophiles. Sorry. And you're supporting, by the way, a law in Iraq that allows 9-year-olds to be married. Yeah, 9-year-old girls, little girls, to be married off to pedophile, dirty clerics. Yeah, and other sick, disgusting people. These are your people that you want to ally us with. But let's move on. Let's deal.
Yeah. So again, I didn't takfir you. I say you have kufr views. If you paid attention when you're hiding behind your hijab in the first debate, in the first part of the debate, if you paid attention, having kufr views does not automatically make you a kafir. So when you, for example, condemn females marrying under 14 as legalized pedophilia that is horrifying, that is kufr. That's a kufr belief, because that is what the Sharia allows, and you call
Peter.
it legalized pedophilia. That's horrifying and shocking and despicable. That is a kufr view. Now, does that make you a kafir? No, because you're an ignoramus. You have the excuse al-udhr bil-jahl, and therefore you're excused. But now I've explained it to you. If you persist on that females marrying under 14 is pedophilia and it's disgusting and horrifying, and the Prophet marrying the Aisha radiallahu anha is horrifying, then you're a kafir. Is that clear? Have I explained the fiqh of takfir to you, Talha? Or do you need you want a private course? I can give you a private course as well.
Yeah, listen, the only thing you need a private course in is not going after and molesting children, apparently. Right.
Wow. So, okay. So now I'm a pedophile. Great.
Well, you support it, buddy. You support it.
Oh, so it's pedophilia. See? So it's pedophilia.
I'm not going to go down that route.
Under 14 is pedophilia.
I'm not going
you're not going down that route.
No. Let's talk about Iran.
So you don't acknowledge that it's
kufr.
By allowing one group to face violence due to an evil ideology, you open up a door that will lead to other groups being attacked. It won't be long before an innocent person or group is attacked also.
Whatever imaginary realm it is that you think Nazis can be constructively debated, go for it, right?
Can Nazis be constructively debated? Not in a public setting, but I want to call your attention to Daryl Davis. NPR wrote that Daryl Davis is a blues musician, but he also has what some might call an interesting hobby. For the past 30 years, Davis, a black man, has spent time befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan. He says once the friendship blossoms, the Klansmen realize that their hate may be misguided. Since Davis started talking with these members, he says 200 Klansmen have given up their robes. When that happens, Davis collects the robes and keeps them in his home as a reminder of the dent he has made in racism by simply sitting down and having dinner with people. Here are some things that Davis has said. What I have come to find to be the greatest and most effective and successful weapon that we can use, known to man, to combat such adversaries as ignorance, racism, hatred, violence, is also the least expensive weapon, and the one that is the least used by Americans. That weapon is called communication. You cannot beat the hate out of a person, but you can love it out of them. I am living proof that friendship, love, and patience can transform the hearts of those you once thought were beyond reach. What do you think would have happened if Davis punched a Klansman? Do you think it would have helped or made things worse? It would obviously have entrenched their racism even more and confirmed their worldview about black people being violent. Communication was a far better strategy.
Said, oh, do you support political violence? Do you want me to support political? Just slow down, okay? Do I support political violence? We're talking about punching fascists in the face, not suicide bombing, okay? Relax. Why do I support political? Why the fuck are you a volunteer Nazi safety advocate is my question.
Questioning the legitimacy of punching someone based on their ideology does not make you an advocate for that group's safety. The issue isn't about protecting the individual Nazi, but rather about addressing the broader cultural consequences of normalizing violence. When society begins to accept violence toward people based on their ideology, it may start with Nazis, but it won't stop there. Furthermore, as discussed earlier, punching a Nazi is not an effective strategy to change their beliefs. In fact, it's likely to reinforce a persecution mentality, or worse, turn them into a martyr for their cause. This escalation doesn't help dismantle their ideology, it strengthens their resolve. Additionally, consider the broader implications of humiliation. As noted in humiliation, mental health and public shame. Although there is only sparse empirical research into humiliation or its psychopathology or effects, as noted by scholars such as Ellison and Harder, 2007, anecdotal or narrative evidence suggests that humiliation provokes suicide, mass murders, such as school killings, and other kinds of violence, as in terrorist acts, not least the bombing of civilians. Research also identifies a link between humiliation and depression or anxiety. Clearly, humiliation can drive people into psychologically compromised states, which in turn may develop into self or other directed violence. When a Nazi is punched, I don't feel bad for the Nazi. The issue is that humiliation often exacerbates the problem. When people are humiliated, they don't improve. They tend to become worse, potentially leading to dangerous consequences for others.
That's a funny thing to be concerned about, the well-being of hypothetical Nazis.
How is it hypothetical when you literally started the discussion with a real example? And the well-being that we are concerned about is the group that will be targeted after the Nazis, because once you allow violence against one group, it will spread to other groups.
Well, it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide who gets punched in the face? If you punch a Nazi, who's next? Hopefully more Nazis. Why would you only punch one? That doesn't seem right.
That's pretty funny, but totally naive. And I understand that this is for comedy, so the points are not really put in their most persuasive form. But it is interesting to discuss anyway. To end this discussion, I encourage you to ask yourself whether punching Nazis is something some of the greatest public intellectuals would engage in. And if the answer is no, then probably don't engage in that behavior. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe.